You are listening to Kaisers Kastle.
Hello, folks. Welcome to Kaisers Kastle. Take a big seat on my big orange couch. I have a special treat for you tonight. Or today, this afternoon, whatever you want to call it, wherever you are in this big blue marble. I have Dr. James Fetzer, James H. Fetzer. He is a former Marine officer. Of course, you know I'm a Marine, so that's very important to me, because I understand his outlook. Marines are the one thing that never change in this nation. Our values and our waypoints, the things we hold sacred. And that's truth, loyalty. I mean, there's a bunch to it. JJ did tie buckle. You guys can look it up. And then he's also a doctor, I believe, and he can correct me if I'm wrong after I'm done with the introduction, of philosophy and history. And the most important part is he's an author, and his books have much impact on truth. So with that being said, Dr. Fetzer, please feel free to make any corrections or introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks, James. That's a real pleasure. Semper Fi, by the way. I was commissioned... over the Far East, but not into Vietnam, which hadn't really blown up yet, but in Korea, Japan twice, Formosa, Philippines, with R&R in Hong Kong. I wound up returning to the United States and was assigned to the recruit depot in San Diego, where I had 15 DIs and 300 recruits under my command going through the training cycle. And then the following year, I was moved up to regimental headquarters, where I was assigned the task of revising the training program from training 8,000 recruits in 11 weeks to 11,000 recruits in 8 weeks, and was there to see it operating at max capacity. In retrospect, I have mixed feelings about it, because I believe the war was a huge mistake, but then we've been in a lot of mistaken wars now, where our involvement in the Middle East seems to me all but catastrophic, and I'm highly apprehensive that Donald may pull out of the Iran deal, which would be a huge blunder in my estimation. Iran is one of the few among the nations of the world that is truly peace-loving, hasn't attacked another nation with a war of aggression since 1775. Just to put that in perspective, the ratification of the Constitution began in 1787. The election of George Washington as our first president in 1789. For longer than the United States has existed as a constitutional republic, therefore, Iran has not launched a war of aggression against another nation. Would that could be said of the United States, where designed my commission as a captain to enter graduate school in the history and the philosophy of science. It's an interdisciplinary program, James, where you study both the history of science and the philosophy of science. I earned my PhD in 1970, began a 35-year career at a wide range of colleges and universities: Kentucky, Virginia twice, Cincinnati, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, New College of the University of South Florida, and Sarasota. Took a year to study computer science and artificial intelligence in a special program for PhDs in philosophy and linguistics at Wright State before I was hired as full professor with tenure on the Duluth campus of the University of Minnesota in 1987, where I would spend the remaining 19 years of my professional career. In 1996, I was made one of the first 10 in a new program the university had introduced to recognize distinguished full professors in the early years of their tenure, entitled the Distinguished McKnight University Professor Program, a title I retain even in retirement, so that I'm McKnight Professor Emeritus. In 1987, when I retired, I moved down near Madison, Wisconsin, where my daughter and son-in-law reside. They were going to start a family and wanted me and Jan to be near to help to raise their kids, which has been a sensational experience. We've had a wonderful time. Most of my career was devoted to teaching courses, offering courses in logic, critical thinking, and scientific reasoning. I began research on JFK while I was still a professor. In 1992, I began putting together a research group, including the most talented, qualified individuals to ever study the case, including a world authority on the human brain, who is also an expert in wound ballistics by the name of Bob Livingston, who founded the first department of neuroscience in the world at the University of California, San Diego. A PhD and MD, David W. Mandick, who had both a PhD in physics from Wisconsin and MD from Michigan, board certified in radiation oncology, which is a treatment of cancer using X-ray therapy. So he's an expert in the interpretation of X-rays. A physician who'd been in trauma room number 1, Charles Crenshaw, when JFK's moribund body was brought in, and then 2 days later was responsible for the care and treatment of his alleged assassin, Lee Oswald, in trauma room number 2. A celebrated, legendary photo and film analyst by the name of Jack White, another PhD in physics by the name of John P. Costello, this time with a specialty in electromagnetism, the properties of light and of images of moving objects, where by 1998, I was editing the first of what would be a trilogy, 3 books, that Vince Bugliosi, in his 1,500-page opus attempting to resurrect the Warren Commission, entitled Reclaiming History, is described as the only 3 exclusively scientific books ever published on the assassination. The first was entitled Assassination Science, published the work of Mandick, showing the autopsy X-rays had been altered to conceal a fist-sized blowout to the back of the head, that there were also indications of a second shot to the head by a distribution of metallic particles that had entered the right temple, an exploding or frangible bullet, that the brain shown in diagrams and photographs in the National Archives can't be the brain of JFK. It's a virtually completely intact brain with only minimal damage. Now, since Jack had half his brains blown out in Dealey Plaza, I could have drawn that conclusion, but how much better coming from a world authority on the human brain. We would subsequently expose that the Zapruder film had been altered. We have an extant version that was revised already the weekend after the assassination, where the original was developed in Dallas and brought to the National Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, the 23rd, as 8mm already split film, where the NPIC didn't have a camera, a projector, and had to have a shop owner open his store so they could buy one in order to view it. But the following day it was replaced by the substitute, the edited film, that was a 16mm unsplit film, where what the camera does is to use a 16mm film, but it shoots down one side called side A, then you take it out and shoots the other side. So you're actually creating 2 8mm wide strips, and in order to project the whole thing, you'd have to split it and splice it together. So that I surmise now, and my second book was entitled Murder in Dealey Plaza, published in 2000. Many think it was the best balanced book ever published on the assassination. The third, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, published in 2003, where we demonstrate, in copious detail how the film was altered and revised. One of the discoveries I had made was that because so much attention had been paid to blacking out the blowout at the back of JFK's head in early frames, in the extant film it's frame 313 where he appears to be hit in the head, and then 14, 15, 16, 17, the back of the head is blacked out, but it appeared to me they might have overlooked that it could be seen in later films, and I found, voila, in frame 374, you can actually see the blowout. It's blue-gray matter. You've heard how often brains are referred to as gray matter, but there's also a pinkish section of a skull flap there that was blown out when the bullet exploded. And when you compare area P for patched in David's study of the autopsy x-rays with the area I discovered of the blowout in the back of the head, there's a very close resemblance where there's some hair on Jack's head that overlaps, so it's not quite the same, but very, very close. I mean, it's obviously the same defect. And, gone from there, I would eventually get drawn into doing research on the plane crash that took the life of Senator Paul Wellstone in Minnesota, which occurred only 60 miles north of my office. I published 10 alternative, articles about it in the alternative media before publishing a co-authored book with Don Ferrero's Jacobs entitled American Assassination, The Strange Death of Senator Paul Wellstone, who appears to have been taken out by creating an electromagnetic field and drawing the plane into the area by manipulating the GPS, which no one had ever known to be possible before, but where it popped the electronic components on the plane, including navigation, communication, and so forth, and put the props below idle, so the plane was destined to crash. It appears the pilots tried heroically to save the plane, but were unsuccessful. It came down in a wooded area of relatively soft trees where the wings were broken off and the tail, which is very odd because to ensure that the components would be destroyed, because otherwise the way it was done would have been apparent. It was reduced to ash. John P. Costello, the same guy, collaborated with me on this. We were tromping around in the snow in 35 below zero weather at the Wellstone crash site, picking up pieces of the wreckage, where John and I would subsequently, after the book, publish an article entitled The NTSB, for the National Transportation Safety Board, Failed Wellstone, which has 5 or 6 photographs and is only a few pages. I believe it's the most copiously documented article ever published, because it has like 125 footnotes for the 4 pages. But that's a brief. I would get drawn into Sandy Hook eventually, having discovered how massively we'd been betrayed about JFK in 9/11, where I founded Scholars for 9/11 Truth in December of 2005, and went from there, where at this point in time I have 24 scholarly books and a dozen books on conspiracy research, including JFK, 9/11, Wellstone, Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, Orlando and Dallas, Charlottesville. I'm in the present editing a book about Parkland and a second about Las Vegas, which are equally massive deceptions perpetrated on the American people. And James, I'm sure that's more than you expected by way of intro, but I thought I'd lay out some basics so your audience can understand who I am and where I'm coming from.
No, that's awesome, Dr. Fetzer. I'm being very frank and honest with you. That is a great nutshell. I'm glad to see that we chewed dirt in probably 3 separate places. We chewed it in Japan. I know the sacred mountain you're talking about. It's called Fuji. I worked with I was a military policeman in the Marine Corps, and I worked with their military police. And so I've been there. Also, and I was in 3rd FSSG. That unit no longer exists. Force Service Support Group. It was like it's hard to explain it, but it would be an easier way to put people on MUs, Marine Expeditionary Units, than having them come out of division, if that makes sense to you, for logistics. And you know, military police, whether we like it or not, we do deal a lot in logistics of people, personnel, this, that, and the other. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
EPWs, all that stuff. Also, Cincinnati, not too far from me. Same with Wright State. I had a brother who graduated who went on to retire as a colonel with the Osprey program. He was actually what do you call it, a wing leader or whatever. I never swang with the wing, so I was always a field MP, both in the Army and the Marine Corps. But yeah, so it's awesome hearing we've chewed some fat in the same areas, Okinawa and Ohio and Japan too. But the more important part is it's a blessing that you're able to stay with your kids, see your grandkids. I mean, that's a blessing people don't get when you raise good kids. And I always say you can tell what a person is by how their children are. And that says a lot. You know what I'm saying? And,
well, you know, I think I agree with that, James, because I was very impressed, for example, with Donald Trump's kids, Ivanka, Eric, and Donald Jr. They impressed me as very high quality. I continue to maintain that opinion to this day. I voted for Trump because it appeared to me he was going to end the wars in the Middle East, and that's why I'm so distraught that he may today pull out of the Iran agreement, because it was a very sound agreement. And it appears to me it's only under the influence of Bibi Netanyahu and the Zionists who are trying to manipulate Trump for the benefit of Israel, not for the benefit of the United States, that he's even contemplating pulling out, because they're in technical compliance. Everyone agrees. Iran actually had abandoned its attempt to develop nuclear weapons by 2003 when Saddam Hussein was taken out. They were only actually pursuing them as a defensive measure because the United States, Vice President Cheney, Scooter Libby, Condoleezza Rice were all claiming that Saddam was developing nuclear weapons. Well, Iran had a titanic war between 1980 and 1988 with Iraq, in which both sides lost about 1 million troops. Yes. I mean, it was stunning, you know. Yeah. So they were, of course, wary. And if the U.S., the vice president was declaring Saddam had nukes, I think they felt they better prepare themselves to defend themselves by developing them themselves. But the fact is, when Saddam was taken out in 2003, and there's an interesting story that goes along with that, they realized they didn't need them, and they abandoned, which our own intel agencies, the big three, it's usually said all 17. That's absurd. For example, the Coast Guard doesn't know anything about whether or not, you know, Iran or Iraq has nukes. It's NSA, the CIA, and you know, the FBI primarily. They converged in the conclusion in 2007 already that Iran was no longer seeking to develop nuclear weapons, which they reaffirmed in 2011. In fact, James, in 2012, the Mossad came in to join in agreement that Iran was not seeking to develop nuclear weapons just weeks before Bibi Netanyahu went to the UN and declared precisely the opposite. So, in my opinion, there's a problem in the Middle East, but it has nothing to do with Iran and everything to do with Israel.
For that, I will quantify it with three things: Mossad, and I'll also say ADL and SPLC locally. You know what I mean by that. I'm not going to get into it. But here's the thing that will blow you away. You were talking about that one jet going down. It's on my page, on my YouTube. I talk about a guy by the name of Gerald Bull. And Gerald Bull actually invented these long-range guns, right? Artillery. Yeah. You're an artillery guy. He's a doctor, okay? He was studying putting satellites into space. And there was a technology that and now it's been put out by a fusion center in Washington or Oregon. I can't remember which, because I don't have anything open because I want to devote my time with you. So I'm going by memory. where they talk about the electromagnetic effects, and it even mentions satellite. And they're talking about cell phones and this, that, and the other. But the thing is, this was a truthful thing. They actually called back. I was in the first Gulf War. I've spent 1/4 of my life, roughly, in the Near East, helping this country out of a sense of patriotism. So this is, you know, a little of my backstory. And both in the Marines and also as a contractor. And when I worked for the federal government, my first agency. So here's the thing that I see. During the Gulf War, there was 4 countries that had this technology that it basically could short circuit human biology, almost like a nerve agent, from the air, from a satellite. And that was America, Russia, China, and Iraq. And Iraq only had it because they put their satellites up with the artillery pieces of Gerald Bull. Notice he got assassinated in, why am I mind dumping? Brussels, Belgium. And the interesting thing about this, they destroyed the artillery pieces. Also, they were the 4th largest army at the time. So we weren't going to go after China or Russia. We wanted to prove a point, right? And they called back our NBC Pro gear, and inside it, when you got the new ones, and we were told we only got 1 each because they were so rare for the Marine Corps to have them. If you were to cut them open, you'd see these little copper wires that would protect us from that weapon. And George Bush, it's the only time anybody's ever said this: nuclear, chemical, biological, and other weapons of mass destruction, in that famous speech. When April Gillespie went up to Saddam and told him, we have no problem with an Arab-to-Arab war, when he went into Kuwait, and then within days, you had the Muslim teenage girl from Kuwait and others saying babies are being thrown out in the streets, pulling on American, and it pulled on mine. And then the hardest part for me was when Bush told the Shia, rise up and we'll back you up. And all of a sudden, no backup came, and we got to watch on CNN, the CIA news network, we got to watch the extermination of the Shia. And later, that would return to me when I went to Wasat Province, which is in Iraq, training Iraqi police and other things. What blew me away was these people had lost so many family members during that time, yet they had no hatred for me. And it was eye-opening. Anyways, enough about me.
No, this is fascinating, James. Yeah, and of course that young Kuwaiti girl who claimed to have been in a hospital in Kuwait turned out to be the daughter of the ambassador who had been trained by a PR firm. The whole story was a fabrication, but it had great emotional effect. I mean, this is the level to which Dick Cheney and George W. Bush were willing to go to deceive the American people. Barack Obama was similarly inclined, where, for example, the raid on the compound in Pakistan in 2011, going after Osama bin Laden, was completely fabricated. Osama had actually died on 15 December 2001. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Afghanistan in accordance with Muslim traditions. There were local obituaries. Both Fox News and CNN published on the 26th of December 2001 the report that Osama was dead. The New York Times would eventually follow 6 months later. Right. But the fact of the matter is there was no Osama around because I was then, as the, with scholars for 9/11 Truth, publishing articles about it. We were doing reports about how the more recent audio and videotapes of Osama were fabrications. They weren't the real Osama. I had the leading expert on Osama as one of my sources. Nick Kollerström, PhD, who's the world's leading expert on the London 7/7 bombing, where he published Terror on the Tube, now in its 3rd edition, cracked the case by discovering that the train from Luton, that the young Islamic lads who'd apparently been lured into playing a role in a drill that was being run by Peter Power on the same tube stops where the train's explosions would take place, had been canceled that day. So they weren't even at the tube stops when the explosions took place. Moreover, it was supposed to have been from backpacks that were inside the carriages, in which case the steel of the flooring would have blown down and out. Instead, it's blown up and in, meaning the explosives were underneath the carriage. Nick Kollerström, in addition to his many contributions here, where, by the way, he has a new book at moonrockbooks.com entitled False Flag Chronicles, a European Perspective, where he goes through 13, a baker's dozen of these phony fabricated attacks in Europe, published a piece on my blog entitled Osama bin Laden, 1957 to 2001, including photographs of the fake Osama versus the real one, where anyone could get an overview. In fact, Osama bin Laden was our man in Afghanistan. He was instrumental. You know, James, how many people don't realize this? He was instrumental in getting the Stinger missiles into the hands of the Mujahideen, which they used to shoot down the Soviet helicopters and planes and drove them out. He was actually in the CIA. It was Colonel Tim Osmond of the CIA, where an official of the agency visited him in a hospital in Dubai shortly before his death, where he was suffering from the medical maladies that would eventually bring about his
demise.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing about that is you're exactly correct, except for here's my draw on it, because you know Amir Masood. I've also been to Afghanistan. Trust me, numerous times, more than I wish. Trust me, I'm an American. I had a problem. I learned Arabic in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and so you know I'm kind of a commodity. But the interesting thing is that when I know that Osama, the list was basically Islamic Sunni coming in to put down the people of the book, you know, the Russians, the godless communists, and it was like a hunting club, you know, come here and fight the Russians. And then Masood, the Lion of the Panjshir, I've stood at his grave, and there's another person that stood at his grave, and I got pictures, and this will blow you away, but he's the mayor of Charlottesville. I bodyguarded him for Democracy International. I think it was 2010.
Are you talking about Signer?
Yeah.
Because he was participant in the whole fraud in Charlottesville. He ordered the Charlottesville police to stand down.
I understand. I
told about this, James.
He was also John Edwards' campaign manager, and I was telling him about my politics. You know, we were just messing around, and him and the other client, who I'll not mention. I only mention that because of your book. The other person that I was talking with, we were just having a political discussion. My 2IC at the time, was very uncomfortable that we were talking politics with clients. And he would get up like, I don't know. Anyways, I don't want to go off on that tangent, but it's something that where I've told this to people for years. And I mean this. People you've met in real life, you will meet again if you live long enough. And all I say is I Forrest Gump myself around this planet, this big blue marble, and it's been more true than not. You know, and people will always come to their own conclusions about you, but I actually thought pretty highly of him before that event. Before that event.
Of Signer.
Yeah. Before that event. That was probably the worst day in America, and it was caused by, it wasn't just Signer, it's Terry McAuliffe, the governor, and it was also done by the deep state, because nobody can ever convince me that certain people on the quote-unquote opposite side were not also players in that, just because of my past experience and knowledge.
Well, George Soros bust in the Black Lives Matter and Antifa people in order to create a fabricated incident with them, which, Terry McAuliffe used the state police after the Charlottesville stood down to channel them into this violent confrontation. But James, you know that the event that occurred a few blocks away at this intersection was all rigged and staged. They'd used 2 different vehicles, 2 different drivers, 2, even 3 different takes. The photograph of the event that appeared in the New York Times was photoshopped with actors in the air, stuntmen. I mean, the whole thing was completely outrageous.
And the woman died of a heart attack. She did not get hit by anything.
Heather Heyer died the following day. She didn't die during the event. And get this, James. Yeah. The woman who played her mother turned out to have played the mother of one of the teachers at Sandy Hook. I mean, it's that bad. It's that embarrassing. It's that blatant.
That's the deep state, man. That's why I tell people everything they think they know, they don't know. But you're my guest. I don't want to go blathering. I was just saying, I was making a point that you will always find, and like I said, I Forrest Gump myself through this, and you will always find you'll meet that same person another time. And it doesn't matter in what form, and there probably won't be the same form the next time. But as long as you stay honest and true with your beliefs and honor, I don't care. They could say whatever they want about me and make up all kinds of lies. I know the truth. And so does my wife and son. And I don't indoctrinate anybody. All I do is tell the truth. And if that's too unpalatable, look, you're the most dangerous man because you speak the truth. I speak the truth, but I don't know if that makes me dangerous. It just makes me a truth teller.
Well, Mike Adams used that phrase because he found that he had an old interview with me about the banning of the book Nobody Died at Sandy Hook taken down, and then he had his whole channel wiped out where he had over 1,700 videos. He was eventually restored, but he lost like 200,000 subscribers. I mean, they've been vicious about this and going after anyone who's exposing the charades. So the fact is, I've done so much research on Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing, Orlando and Dallas, Charlottesville, Las Vegas, Parkland. I mean, we even know how they faked the kids at Sandy Hook by using photographs of older kids when they were younger. Wolfgang Halvig has even turned up now a photograph of 8 of the Sandy Hook girls, all real perky. They're in high school. Looking real cute, and juxtapose them with the photographs of them as 6, first graders who were supposed to be dead. He has another photograph of even more of the girls with 4 of the boys, where the 4th is clearly the Noah Posner all grown up, where he was made up out of photographs of his older stepbrother, Michael Vabner. I mean, the charade is enormous. Wolfgang sent him to me. He'd had him verified by a photographic expert. I have no doubt about it. I mean, the whole thing is completely obscene. And the fact is, they're pulling the wool over the eyes of the American people to instill us with fear and make us more amenable to the promotion of their own political agenda, which includes gun confiscation. I mean, it's completely outrageous. You even have... There's a Democrat who's now starting to make appearances on TV who's calling for a complete gun confiscation of any of the so-called assault weapons, which are just the weapons you'd need to defeat a tyranny being imposed on the United States. In fact, these arguments, James, are so stupid, it's incredible to me. Just to give one illustration, Emperor Hirohito was contemplating a Japanese invasion of the mainland United States, but he was advised by his senior military officers that it would be a huge mistake because there'd be a sniper behind every bush. In fact, Mike Adams said it was a sniper behind every blade of grass. So, I mean, that was one thing. The fact is, China has like the world's largest standing army of 2.5 million troops, but we have an unofficial citizen army of over 100 million. I mean, Really, this is our nation's greatest key to its ultimate national security and survival. We have a whole trained cadre of American citizens who would be prepared to fight for the United States. And you have idiots like this guy who want to disarm us. I mean, it's insane, Jane, completely insane.
It truly is, Doctor. And I'll give you a prime example. Look at Switzerland. Switzerland's people drill. They fire from mountaintop to mountaintop with traffic going over, under. And they've been doing this for, well, since gunpowder and guns were invented. And the funniest thing to me is that they say because they don't have the length. And there's another guy who had spoken this thing. I'm trying to think of his name. Matt Bracken. That's his name. He had said Switzerland and the U.S. are like the only two countries that could withstand an onslaught from the outside unless we get corrupted from within. And Switzerland's resistant to that. Of course they are, because they have the Swiss banks. But America, we're a little, and so is the Western Europe, man. Western Europe from the 80s, before I was in the Army, before I was in the in the Marines. So I want to be very translucent with you. I went into the Army at 17 and saw the Berlin Wall. And the problem is there's no Berlin Wall for the people to see now. And so they want to keep making the epic mistake. And I mean this when I say the epic mistake of communism. And people forget the head of the NKVD, and tell me if this does not sound familiar. The precursor to the KGB. Show me the man and I'll find you the crime. Has this become the normal in the USA? And why, Doctor?
Well, that's exactly what's going on with the Mueller investigation of Trump. It was improper. There was never a specifically designated offense for him to investigate. Rod Rosenstein was corrupt in making this appointment. It's exactly as you described. They've targeted the man, Donald Trump, and asked Mueller to find a crime. And notice how far afield he's wandering. The whole Russian collusion thing was a fabrication. It was made up by Robbie Mook and John Podesta within 24 hours of Hillary's concession speech in order to distract attention from the incompetent campaign they had run, from the contents of the WikiLeaks revelations that led directly to Pizzagate, where John Podesta himself is pedophile in chief, and from Hillary's own entanglements with Russia, including selling 20% of U.S. uranium reserves through Uranium One, a Canadian company, for a contribution of $145 million to the Clinton Foundation, with the approval of Barack Obama. And I say, if Julius and Ethel Rosenberg received the electric chair for sharing U.S. atomic secrets with the then Soviet Union, what do Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama deserve for selling off 20% of U.S. uranium to Russia? I mean, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. They are among the greatest traitors in the history of the United States.
Well, I'm sure you and I will be considered the greatest traitors because, as we were talking before the show, there's something that's actually, and I think I was the first to bring it up. I heard it on Pump Up the Volume. It's an old 80s show. You guys need to listen to it if you haven't heard it before. And there's a time where he says, who knew that a thought with a voice would become a virus? And honestly, you break it down nicely. I can't break it down so nicely. I'm not diplomatic. I can be, but I choose not to be anymore because the lies are overwhelming. And from the time I brought my son up and the time I went to the Army and the Marine Corps, two things were stressed to me. First off, you tell the truth. Second thing is you do what's right. And we have failed in that. And with the only ones that haven't, I'm going to be honest with you, all federal agencies, the IGs, they have a motto, and the inspector generals follow it, okay? Right and just. And that's should have been what the FBI's motto was, but no, you know, Blue Flame Special Hoover made sure it was a different motto. That's all I'll say on that. I don't want to get deep into it because this really upsets me that federal law enforcement has gone, and the intelligence community has gone this far afield. And I don't have any trust for the FBI or any of their subsidiaries.
Well, justifiably, I mean, they've proven to be completely corrupt. It turns out the FBI and the Department of Justice, key players, were working with the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign to fabricate this dossier attributed to the British spy by the name of Christopher Steele. It was a total fabrication. They were, you know, justifying spying on Trump with a FISA court by using this fabricated dossier. Right. The whole thing was a complete charade in an attempt to undermine democracy in the United States by sabotaging the prospects of the candidate, threatening Hillary. I mean, no one actually believed Trump had a chance, not even Trump himself. It turned out that he was elected because there were voters in the rural counties of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin which had suffered many casualties from these endless wars in the Middle East on behalf of Israel, who voted for Trump in the belief that he was the less likely of the two to continue the wars. And based upon his campaign positions, there's no question about it, Hillary's a notorious hawk. I do believe, James, ironically, that if the DNC had allowed the democratic process to work instead of sabotaging the campaign of Bernie Sanders,
she might have won.
No, he might have won because
right.
But Bernie's foreign policy overlapped with that of Donald Trump, but his domestic policy is much more congenial to the American people in general. I mean, I myself regard myself as a JFK FDR liberal in the sense that I believe in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, work compensation, and all that. I mean, these are the benefits that actually benefit the American people.
Right, for Americans.
And so does Bernie. But Trump, unfortunately, you know, has more of that doctrinaire Republican cut back on the safety welfare network, which I think is a huge mistake. But the fact is he won fair and square because the voters in those counties thought he was the less likely to continue the wars. And if now today, James, he's going to issue his decision in 1 hour from now, we're going to learn whether he's withdrawing from the Iran deal, which is going to be catastrophic and a huge blunder historically. It looks to me like he's too much in the grips of the Zionist influence. And of course, I appreciate your point. You know, Jews good, Zionists bad. In fact, they're good and bad members of Judaism, just as there are good and bad members of Islam, good and bad members of Christianity.
Right.
The bad Muslims, for example, include the Wahhabis, who are from Saudi Arabia, who believe in beheading the infidels and turning their women into sex slaves.
Yes, and under Hillary, people forget this. Under the Hildebeest, she decided to let's go invade Libya. When Gaddafi said, look, I have no weapons of mass destruction. What are you going to do invading me? And if you do, Europe will be flooded. And so will you, America. And it's very true because of all the different agreements we have. I don't want to get into my backstory. But like I said, he was a seer, and we're seeing it happen right now. And they have the slave markets back open in Libya, brother. Sorry about that, doctor. I think of you as a Marine sometimes when I say brother, because here's the thing. When I was in both the Army and the Marine Corps, they taught us to think for ourselves, because there may be a time when there's no leader, and your leader had to teach you how to lead. And for some reason, that has left. It hasn't left the military. Even under, I measure my tone when I talk about this piece of filth we had for quite a few years. Even under him, the military resisted minutely because he started doing what Stalin did, the purge of our military of good leaders like Flynn. And anyways, that's a petard I'll die on. So, but I do like how, I will tell you this, I do like how Trump has brought everybody from one division of Marines. You think about who he's brought into his cabinet. They're from one division of Marines. And their motto is, no better friend, no worst enemy. And you know who that is. And I'm not going to say any more.
Yeah, well, he's done a lot of things I think are very good. I just hope he doesn't start mucking things up by pursuing a Zionist foreign policy under the influence of Bibi Netanyahu.
I agree. We're not going to argue over that because I hope he, if he does renegotiate, I hope he understands. I think he does have the people that can renegotiate a better deal. And that would be beneficial for everybody because look what he did with Korea. And I'm asking you this cold. We did not discuss this at all. You know my thought. Well, no, you don't probably. But Korea, that is something I served in Korea. Yeah, you did too.
Yeah, I pulled training ops in Korea, yes.
Yeah. And the thing is, you know, we have an intimate feeling for that area and a respect and I've watched it transition from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un. And I'll tell you this, I don't know if you knew this or not, you can research it. Dennis Rodman, people forget his dad was intelligence. Don't ever forget this. Look it up. You'll find out I'm telling the truth. So,
yeah, well, Rodman made a trip, yes, to North Korea. I believe that it was the Chinese who have instructed Kim that he ought to, shut down his program. That Chinese scientists actually visited the site and warned that it was vulnerable to collapse. The United States may have, encouraged that happening. One way or another, but my opinion is that Trump is an opportunist. He's a great showman. He knows how to use the media better than any president we've ever had in our history, and I think as a consequence that that he'll take credit even if he isn't really entitled to the credit because it's smart politics. And in this case, of course, we have precisely that situation where he can do it, and no one's in the position to contradict him, at least not in the mainstream media.
Not at this time. Future will tell. But the interesting thing is it is a joy to me that they're not going to do it rushed like West and East Germany did, because that rush almost destroyed both economies. And it's only now they've gotten their economies back, but now it's getting destroyed because of Angela Merkel. And I don't want to talk about her Stasi FDJ. I made a video a long time ago about her and Milke and all the other different apparatchiks. This is a long time ago in my past when I was trying to explain things, which I think fell on deaf ears. But the thing about this is Merkel, it looked like she's moving, and people forget their constitution, they're still under U.S. control. And so is Korea in a lot of ways. The KCIA is massively involved, and people forget that the CIA had no assets in Eastern Europe and Russia, except for Galen's organization. And Galen founded the BND, the Bundesnachdienst. And so, I mean, there's a lot of backstory. But the one thing that I think we might see out of this is a slow 10-year, and maybe they'll just be like the Chinese government, where they're just happy making money off the people, and the people are at least eating and not cannibalizing themselves. Your opinion? It's pretty
Yeah,
important.
James, my opinion on exactly. Say again.
Yeah? Hello?
James. Yeah, would you repeat the point? Repeat the point.
I said hopefully they become like an oligarchical structure like China is now. And at least their people eat and they get rich. And it's not where the people are cannibalizing themselves just to eat, if you understand what I mean.
What are you talking about? Korea?
Korea,
Yeah. Well, I think I think we're going to see a merge of North and South Korea. I think it's going to happen. I think both sides want it. I think because of the role of China, it's going to come to pass. I think the United States is going to be basically left on the sidelines. That's why Trump, I think, when he meets with Kim, has to be supportive of the reunification so he can take credit with the American public, even though it's basically been engineered by China behind the scenes.
When I saw that brotherly love hug and I saw the words, from just seeing what I was seeing, and they called each other brothers, the Hermit Kingdom was called that for a reason. They were the Hermit Kingdom. And I do believe, like you said, the radiation leak with the winds is probably going right over China. And China probably told Kim, you're going to do something or we're going to get involved. I said this a long time ago. Well, about a couple months ago. And I said we'll see peace by, I hope, unless the deep state gets involved. That's the one wild card, is if they get involved and do their machinations. And I'm talking globally, because remember, it was a UN war. That's why the UN needs to be taken out. Just because they will help the deep state in this, trust me. I worry that they'll get in and try to screw everything up. And it should be a Korea to Korea thing to make one unified hermit kingdom. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, I think you're on top of it. You've had a lot of experience worldwide, James. It's very interesting how much you got around in the military, both sides of the world, as it were. And it seems to me that's put you in quite a knowledgeable position based upon your own personal experience to comment on many of these issues that most Americans only know in the abstract and from what they hear on television.
Well, I'm nothing more than trailer trash. I grew up in a trailer park, went to school and all that shit. Who cares? Nobody cares about that. But the funny thing is I never lost my hillbilly touch. I treated everybody like I would treat anybody else. And I think we've lost that in diplomacy. Anyways, it matters not, my opinion.
Well, just to return to these false flag issues, let me encourage leaders to check this out on Natural News. The most dangerous mind in America interviewed about false flags and extreme censorship. In the article, Mike Adams is principally defending my freedom of speech and condemning the censorship that's been extended toward me, including of Mike himself. But he also claims that he disagrees with my conclusions. Now, the catch is that he doesn't give any reasons. He doesn't provide any supporting evidence for disagreeing with my conclusions. Now, it's a common belief that everyone's entitled to their opinion, which is true, but that doesn't mean all opinions are of equal worth. Basically, if you want to have an opinion that's a well-founded opinion, you have to do a certain amount of research. You have to dig into the issues. I'm very glad, for example, that he included links to 3 of my video presentations at the end of the article, one of which is the Parkland puzzle, how the pieces fit together. A second is Sandy Hook update, Tracy loses, Wolfgang wins, the deep state strikes back. And the third is false flags on 5 fronts, where I give a thumbnail sketch about Sandy Hook, Boston, Charlottesville, Las Vegas, and Parkland. So all that evidence is available by the touch of a button for those who are commenting. And yet, James, to my astonishment, one after another simply asserts his opinion without even bothering to look at the evidence. That troubles me profoundly because Mike Adams is a sophisticated guy. I would think that his followers would be above average in intelligence and rationality, and yet for them to making statements like there's one here by a guy named Pale Rider who says, yes, that these events were staged, but with real shooters and real dead kids. Why are people having trouble understanding false flags? But that's ridiculous. There's no evidence that anyone died at Sandy Hook or Boston or Charlottesville or Las Vegas or Parkland. Some of the cases that have received the most publicity nationwide were totally fabricated. Take Orlando, James. Right. The permit for the Pulse Club in Orlando expired 3 years in advance. In other words, it wasn't even operating.
Right.
It had a legal occupancy of 150. They claimed it was packed with over 300.
Right.
Where 50 were killed and 50 more were injured. It only had 11 parking spaces. Now, if it had been crammed with over 300, there would have been abandoned vehicles all over the place, but they are not there.
Right.
Instead, you have some very feeble crisis actors walking around carrying one another. It's like a joke. As soon as they get out of the range of the camera, they put the guy down they've been carrying, and he does a little dance around. A little dance around because they think they've done their job, their performance so well, but it's just appalling. I have a correspondent who resides in the area told me it wasn't even a gay club. We had the Orlando Emergency Medical Center announce they're not billing for any services rendered for the reason they didn't render any services. Right. I mean, when's the last time you heard of a hospital not charging for a Band-Aid? But they were worried they might be charged with theft by deception or fraud if they claim to have rendered any services, because no one was there, no one was harmed, no one was killed. They recently put out a videotape, and if you watch it carefully, you see it's supposed to be inside the club, but the parts of the tape that are from inside the club have no date time stamp on them. Right. In other words, they could have been taken anywhere. And you see what's supposed to be the shooter wandering around, but there's no one else there. It's like the club is empty except for him. And later they show some footage of dancing. Well, there's too much space. There's too much open area to have been crammed with over 300 when the legal occupants is 150. In other words, they're putting out phony, fabricated footage to claim they've released footage about Orlando, but it was a complete sham. And as I have observed, I even have a book about it, from Orlando to Dallas and beyond, because the Dallas shooting involving the cop who's supposed to have gone bananas was similarly fabricated. They even took the image of a corner of a street that had a low wall and a couple of columns that go up about 2 yards high, and they magnified it to put in, this is photoshopping, a series of about 6 armed police officers in order to have a dramatic photograph. And the way it's filmed, edited, cropped, you can't see the top of the colonnade, so you think they must be massive. If you look carefully, James, it turns out the weapons they're carrying have orange blank adapters. They couldn't even fire live rounds. And I'll tell you, we within a short, I think 6 weeks of after publishing about that, I was actually at the Crown Plaza Hotel across the street for a JFK conference. And I walked over there and looked at the wall and all that and confirmed that my research had been spot on. I mean, it was a guy who was a doctor in Seattle who had picked up a copy of the Wall Street Journal that night by midnight Pacific time and discovered they had this Photoshop photograph, which he thought was remarkably fast work. And of course it was. And they had to publish it because it wasn't a real photograph. It was simply one they'd arranged and designed using Photoshop. I mean, it's become that bad, especially when you consider the Wall Street Journal is one of the most widely respected publications in the United States.
The old gray lady, yeah. Here's something that'll blow you away. When the shooting happened in Vegas, now, I've carried a saw, I've carried a M60, I've carried many different guns, even PKMs. I mean, I've AKs, whatever. It was funny to me. My brother Georgios and I, we served during the same time in the Guard. He went in the Marine Corps when I went in the Army. And then when I got out of the Marine Corps, he was in the Guard. okay, my state's guard. And we've fired all kinds of machine guns. And there's a tempo, there's a cadence, there's a way to hear a gun, even through YouTube. And I think that's why they're taking all these gun sites down, honestly, is because you can tell the difference. Mike Adams did an awesome video where, using his scientific lab, he confirmed it was a 7.62 round. And it was a belt fed. Look, you're not going to get that out of Snell magazine. You're not going to get it out of changing rapidly and the distinct signatures coming from different places. I'm not going to get into everything that I think. Well,
you see, James, in my comments on this, I actually address it because it's one of the areas where he and I have had a difference. And as I explained, he's basing his analysis on the contents of the soundtrack that was recorded there. But it turns out that Dan Cromer, who's an IT guy, has established that it was pre-recorded. It was too high quality to have been original. So he's giving an analysis of what's found in terms of the contents of a soundtrack that was pre-recorded. It didn't correspond to what actually happened on the scene, where they coordinated the pre-recorded soundtrack with special visual effects, including flashing lights on the fourth floor in the middle of the Mandalay Bay to simulate a machine gun, and then three light flashes from a floor higher up to, simulate modern American weapons, which, as you know, fire in 3-shot bursts. We even have a video where a guy in the crowd turns to fire on the crowd, and you can see the flash from the muzzle, but no one's hit because he's using blanks.
That's interesting that you're saying that, because I remember, and you probably remember this too, when we went through basic and boot camp. I had 2 boot camps. They had those gas, LP gas machine guns. You probably used them, being an officer. You probably had to sign off on those things. And when you'd be doing the low crawl, it echoed identically to a Kalashnikov at full cyclic rate. And that makes me think that maybe I still, just because of the distance, even though it's an area target, to me, I think that's more logical for it to be a... I found it odd that the only weapon that had a Snell drum mag, when the new video released, I put air quotes when I said that only the AR-10 had that. The AR-15s did not. And I knew the staccato effect. I mean, I could hear it, bop, 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 bop. You've been downrange. Well, I don't know if you have or not, but when you're getting bullets fired at you, you get that tell. Yeah, you have, because you pulled butts in the Marine Corps, where people are shooting. You hear it, and then that snout tap, towel snap happens very quickly after when it hits the target, because that bullet's breaking the sonic boom, and it's so small. And so I'm not going to quibble. I'm just saying I'm seeing points that you're bringing up now that I think I didn't look at, but I don't know if I'm going to step away from the 7.62 analysis on it.
Well, I'm not sure you have to. We've inspected the obituaries that were published for Las Vegas. A brilliant woman named Mona Alexis Presley has been investigating them and found that they, to the extent that they're not simply Photoshop variations of other figures who are presented as decedents, that they are based on people who died in different states or on different dates or from different causes of death. The whole thing's fantastic. Listen, when they did Parkland, they forgot on their checklist to publish the obituaries. It was only hours after we had published an article, actually authored by Dan Cromer as well, that none of the obituaries for the Parkland victims were up anywhere in the world. And it was hours after we put that up that they suddenly appeared. In other words, they were caught with their pants down. It turns out that the sheriff kept 4 deputies back from rushing into the school because they weren't snapped in. They didn't know what was a scam, a rehearsal. He was worried they might shoot one of the officers in the belief that it was real, where they were using simunition. James, I don't know if you've run across it. This is fake ammunition made out of beeswax and laundry detergent.
Yeah, I used it when I was a Fed. That's how we trained. And also, it started coming out when I was in the Marine Corps. And we used it there, too, with all caliber weapons. That's the thing. A lot of Feds will say, oh, it's only for pistol and, like, AR-15s. It's in all calibers. And you have a different safety measure to stay away. You wear the little garb, the little head gear at FLETC. You do these things. And in the Marine Corps, you had to do the same thing, except the only difference was you put a face shield, the old riot shields, if you remember those. But it's not the riot shields you might have remembered, because I came up during the same time when we had in the Army the steel pot, and we transitioned to the Kevlar. And so you have to think about the Kevlar shield, that plastic shield. We would just lower it like a riot situation and do our thing. They had a little neck strap that protected the bullet from going up and hitting you in the neck. But other than that, I have to agree with you, honestly, on a lot of stuff that you're saying. I found it odd, especially with these plane crashes now and with Syria going on. I'm going to be very frank with you, and we haven't talked about this either, my friend. I don't want to call you my friend, brother Marine.
It's James, okay? That's fine. And you're welcome to call me Jim, by the way. I actually prefer it.
Okay, Jim. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
The interesting thing to me is all these crashes of planes. What was the big cover-up for Iran-Contra and everything else? It was always a plane crash. Remember Eugene Hassenfuss?
Yeah.
I mean, I keep telling people, Benghazi, there's a big, long backstory we'll talk off air about for a minute. The people that went there, to me, and this goes over, you have to understand what I'm trying to say. This goes over to Gunwalker. And remember, guns in the trade are not just guns. They're rockets, they're everything, right? But they don't leave the nation without customs clearing them. And even if it's a CIA thing, customs may not be allowed to look at it, but they're going to see the little CIA thing saying, yeah, no, this is going. And State Department was used viciously during the whole shenanigans with Trump. So, to me, it was a cover-up because Christopher, what I'll say is, Christopher was, you remember Adnan Khashoggi from the 80s? The big arms dealer?
Sure. Yeah.
Think about Christopher Stevens that way. But he was so dirty, even Bush wouldn't touch him. Think about that. And yet, he's an ambassador all of a sudden. Yeah, I'll smear his name because I happen to know what he did. So, you know, I'll put myself out there. You know, there are certain things that it's odd that you have that embassy annex only a couple miles away, and we lost some good people there. I don't know if I would say Stevens is. I feel bad as an American that he passed. But I think the machinations, you know, when you hear the Hildebeest say, what difference does it make? They're American lives. It should make all the difference.
Oh, she's a monster. I mean, she was responsible for the slaughter of Libya, which may be the most humane society ever conceived by the hand of man. Gaddafi was sharing the wealth of Libya with the people. National health care, national public education, national warehouses stocked with food. Anyone who was hungry could get all they wanted. If you had a medical problem couldn't be dealt with in Libya, it'd fly you and a friend or relative anywhere in the world, all expense paid by the government to have it treated. He was also introducing the Great Waterworks project that would have turned North Africa into a veritable oasis, and the gold dinar, which would have rapidly become the currency of all of Africa. Yeah, because the French were upset that his influence was growing in Africa, and they wanted to retain it as their own neo-colonial preserve. And because the Rothschild banks were upset with the gold dinar, Hillary, had used NATO to slaughter Libya. I mean, it was grotesque. I mean, I cannot begin to say how bad it was. Gaddafi didn't even put up a fight. He actually volunteered to surrender and was designated a location by the Department of State. Yes. But en route there in a convoy under a white flag of surrender, yes, she had it interdicted, and he was brutally murdered, castrated, and sodomized with a bayonet. That's Hillary. Yeah. That's Hillary Clinton for you. This is a nasty, sadistic monster of a woman, maybe the most despicable female ever in the history of mankind.
I agree with you. Here's the thing that kills me. He protected his border. He was thinking about the entire African continent. And yeah, he's an old man. I'm an old man now. I'm going to be 50. But he was trying to do what was right. And that's an issue that now has swamped Europe, and it's even come here. Remember how many we had to bring in, so many Eritreans, so many people that will never assimilate into Western society. And yet, we should be good with it, man. I'm a racist, bigot, homophobe. Any Trump supporter is that.
The fact is, you got to call them as you see them. And criticism, for example, of Israel for its politics, for its abuse and slaughter of the Palestinians, that's not anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism involves discounting an individual's or their opinion is of no worth or value because of their ethnic origin or religious orientation. When you criticize a government of Israel for atrocities it's committing, that is not anti-Semitism. In fact, James, there's an irony here because DNA studies have shown that the residents of Israel are not descended from the tribe of Judea, but rather from the Kaiserian region of Eastern Europe. So that because the Palestinians are bona fide Semites, in fact, the greatest practitioner of anti-Semitism in the world is the state of Israel.
It blows me away. I've been called anti-Semite. I don't care. Here's the way I look at it. That is nothing more to me than, and this is just my opinion, that's nothing more than me than try to stop an argument. I don't care because I'm not anti-Semite. I think Israel has a right to exist within its own borders. I think it needs to be figured out because of the Balfour document. I don't know how that's going to happen. I'm not that smart. I also think they shouldn't intercede in different nation states. But see, that's what happens when you allow dual citizenship from one nation to another. And I think the Constitution actually specifically said you couldn't be a dual citizenship. And still, if you come across the border in the U.S., they'll say, what citizenship are you? Trust me, when I worked the border, if somebody said I'm a citizen of the world or I'm this or that, and you're like, okay, what's your citizenship? Well, I have Canadian, I'm dual. I have Canadian and U.S. And we'd be like, no, you have to claim one citizenship. And then they'd finally, it's a long story, I'll talk to you off air. But yeah, that's a real story and truth. But we've allowed this. And when I say that, including me, I didn't stand up. I could have been a man among men and stood up against it when I still had a voice in that agency. But, who cares? I don't anymore because I've seen what it wrecked. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I think you have a lot of experience in life, James, and that your opinions are very well founded generally. Do you have a desire for me to pursue any further of the false flag issues, or are we pretty current in relation? I do encourage everyone to check out the article on Natural News. Yep. the most dangerous mind in the world, where there are 3 links, one to the most comprehensive overview of Sandy Hook that runs about an hour and a half. Sandy Hook update, Tracy loses, Wolfgang wins, the deep state strikes back, and you'll understand exactly how it was done. It includes the evidence I've been talking about here today with James. Another is entitled The Parkland Puzzle, How the Pieces Fit Together, and you'll see the elaborate scam that was perpetrated there, where they had to, they had to permit for the march in Washington, D.C. 6 months before the march, which was on the 25th of March itself. But the shooting was only on the 14th of February. So they had to permit for the march long before the shooting, James, and then, falsely claimed that the inspiration for the march had been the shooting. But you'll see how the shooting was completely staged and manufactured. They knew it was coming because they were planning it, and where the key players appear to have been the Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel, who campaigned as a Jew and even cited the Talmud in the course of his campaign, by Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, and the scumbag who ran the DNC and sabotaged Bernie Sanders' campaign, who was very concerned because there was a forthcoming trial involving the IT guys from Pakistan who'd been spying on the Congress with her permission, using her password. She knew that there was a risk of as many as 11 seats being lost in Florida alone. And then a woman named Dina Katz, who was a Jewish producer of the Dancing with the Stars, who's directed many of these marches. So you appear to have had Debbie Wasserman Schultz as the producer, and Dina Katz as the director, and Scott Israel as the local on-site, but where David Hogg's father is with the FBI, and guess what? His area of specialization, he's a crisis management expert.
I'm not getting into my backstory, but there was a certain person. All you need to look at is the shooting in San Bernardino, and there's a black gentleman, really tall, skinny. He now has gray hair, but he had dark hair when he covered up an incident that was close to me. And so this is when we talk about people in the FBI covering up, I believe it because I know it to be true. And with that, I will say it's been my absolute pleasure having you on. I hope you will come on to go more in depth on stuff, because I really wanted to just touch on a few things, and we went even deeper than I think you wanted to, or I wanted to. But
well, James, just know I'm always willing to go as far and as deep as you like, because I have had the benefit of working with the best experts on these different issues. I have published books on most of them. I'm working on new books on Parkland in Las Vegas. So I'm willing to go as deep and as long as you like, and I look very much forward to coming back with you again, my friend. I appreciate very much your invitation to be on with you today, and I look forward to the next.
The most beautiful part is this gentleman, with all of his education, he will talk about things, but he's not so egocentric that it's got to be his thing. He brings on, get his books, folks. You have to get his books. He brings on experts or people that were there to tell him, this is what happened, or this is what I don't think happened, or whatever. And so he's so open-minded, but not so open-minded that his brains fall out. And that's a problem we're having, I think, locally in the world today, that people aren't listening. They're not talking, and everybody assumes everybody's a Nazi, and everybody assumes everybody's a whatever. But they honest discussion is what's missing in America today. Am I right? And with that,
absolutely, James. And the internet, that the social media are doing their best to suppress it. I mean, that's why Google is taking out so many of these videos. Why Mike Adams was led to describe me as the most dangerous mind in America, because people who interview me which will now include you, of course,
Yes.
are vulnerable to having their stuff taken down. YouTube won't tolerate it. We got the same thing from Google, Facebook, Twitter. They're all in a massive onslaught against the right of the people to present their views to the public, even though that was the presumptive basis on which those social media giants were organized and formed in the beginning. They're betraying their agreement with the American people, and it's a phony pretext because they're private companies to violate the First Amendment, which forbids the government, but it's using these social media giants as their instrument to circumvent what the Constitution requires.
The social media was a social construct, and they've decided to violate it. And with that, I'll say, it saddens me that this time has gone so fast. I love talking with you, Dr. Fetzer, brother, friend. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel illuminated and even learned something that I believe I had right, but I'm going to have to look back on it just because of what you said. And but I know it didn't come just from you. You had experts telling you too, because I've read your books. Please, people, buy, if you see something with James Fetzer's name on it, buy his book. Come to your own decision. Critically think. This gentleman is the real deal, and God bless you for being the most dangerous mind. With that being said, Chef out.